Well, we're going to get started, and I'm your host, Glennon, and we're really excited to have you here for Creating Conditions to Thrive, Pathways to Equitable Math Instruction. And Allison Peter is our chat moderator, and she'll throw the link to the slides in the chat for everyone so that you have them as well. Please make sure you're muted today, assume best intentions, and please use the chat throughout the session today. We'll be using it to interact with you regularly. To start, Karen, would you like to kick this off?
Well, I found a quote that I put in on the slide because today we will be talking about belonging. And so I thought before we jump into this conversation, maybe let's check in with ourselves to get grounded. And I put in three images. So in the chat, could you let me know which of these images is a metaphor for how you're feeling today? I have to say the one with the forest and the bridge for me was kind of feeling hopeful to me. And so I thought today that's kind of how I'm feeling, hopeful.
And I see a lot of people sharing and love all the sharing that's happening in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really glad everyone is here. Thanks to each of you.
For those that may not know, we do have a Lunch Bites podcast. So Lunch Bites is continuing to expand. Our most recent episode was with Lena Bakshi, and you can find the podcast on most podcast platforms. Just search Lunch Bites, and the link is also in the slides for you. Everyone's invited to join us at the California STEAM Symposium on December 11th through 13th. It's a virtual event, and we would encourage you to come join us. You can register at steamcalifornia.org and find out much more about that. We'll be previewing some of the presentation titles and keynotes in the weeks ahead leading up to the event. Want to have a quick thank you to our primary sponsor, Chevron, who makes the Lunch Bites podcast and webinar series possible, makes the symposium possible, and they're a huge part of what we do. We also love to hear and see what you're learning, so please share with us on social media at these hashtags and at the CDE Foundation Twitter handle. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen to tell us about our goals for the day and introduce our guests.
Well, as with our previous Lunch Bites webinars, we try to always provide some space for some honest conversation and to give you a demonstration of something that you can have as a takeaway. And so today, as always, we'll be sharing some resources, and we will leave time at the end for Q&A. But if at any time you have a question, please go ahead and put your question in the chat, and Allison and I will be monitoring the chat and be sure your question gets heard. And if you could advance for me, thank you. So I'm really excited to welcome today our guests. We are going to be talking about a pathway to equitable math instruction. And we have three guests that will be speaking with you and sharing with you today. So please join me in welcoming Linda Karstens, Dave Chun, and Al Rabanera. Welcome to you all.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. As Karen said, my name is Dave Chun. I'm the Director of Mathematics at the Sacramento County Office of Ed. And I'm going to invite everybody to engage in an activity for just a moment. So I would encourage you to grab a piece of paper or even pull up a document, whatever works best for you. But reflect on this question for a minute. What is your math identity? And I'm going to ask that you either do a quick write, or you can use words or phrases, or even draw a picture. Pictures or a diagram is perfectly fine. And just to give you a few other thoughts before I pause and let you engage in this is, how do you see yourself as a learner of math and a doer of mathematics? Right, so take a few minutes, reflect, write, draw, and we'll come back in just a couple minutes.
That's great. I've decided as people are thinking about this, I went ahead and I just drew a quick picture. So if other people are like me and like to use an image, I'll just show it out, and you're welcome to do the same. I'm just saying, I've got questions. I got some things I understand, but I'm feeling kind of, a lot of questions today. I appreciate seeing a recovering non-math person who realizes how, this is Lisa, how Lisa was taught and not really based on Lisa's ability.
And now that you've had a moment to think and reflect, some folks have already started to do this. Let me encourage you to drop a few ideas in the chat, or if you have your camera on and you want to hold that up to the to your camera, that would be great as well. So I'll pause a minute. Karen can call out a few things.
Yeah, I see Chris Kelly is, is reflecting on how questioning everything that doesn't make sense, how important that is, asking learners why. And Brian seeing himself as a learner of math and choosing a career in it because he saw it as a challenge.
And Laura's statements resonating with me, and I'm always feeling like I'm revisiting something and having to open the book and relearn regularly when it comes to math.
Mm-hmm.
So Al, can you share with us a bit more? You did an activity similar to this with your students. Can you share?
Yeah, sure, Dave. Hi, I'm Al Rapinera, a high school math educator from Fullerton and a Teach Plus Policy Fellow. To cultivate my classroom community and to develop rapport with my students, I started this school year by focusing on the themes of belonging and identity while integrating the tech apps that we'd be using throughout the year. Asking questions to my students about their math identity helped me to understand their views of themselves as learners and doers of mathematics. This information is important to me to meet my students where they're at, not only academically, but also socially and emotionally. In my classroom, I created a structure where students could experience small wins each day to build their confidence with their procedural skills as they practice the academic vocabulary, and to see them as doers of mathematics. So I scaffold my lessons to build on the previous day's content to create opportunities for these small wins. So this is them, engaging in that activity, which we built up. First, we talked about, how do you know you belong? And then how do you know you belong in a math classroom? Then we shifted to, we had a discussion about that. And then we talked about what is your identity, to get ideas out. And then this was their response to, what is your math identity? And maybe some of these pictures or ideas match up with what you might have written, right? But this is a way for me to connect early on at the beginning of the school year, to find out more about my kids and to say, hey, this is a safe space where we can share ideas and grow as learners together. So Linda, could you please speak to the math equity tool we created that can help facilitate this kind of learning?
Sure. Hi, I'm Linda Karstens, a retired education researcher from Stanford University, representing the English Learner Support Forum in this math project. Most teachers are very familiar with the mathematics content standards, subdivided by learning strands and grade levels, and they're familiar with the condensation of math standards into priority standards this year. That work was done by the Student Achievement Partners this spring. Math teachers are also quite familiar with the 8 standards of mathematical practice, which describe what students do while they are learning content. These standards of mathematical practice, or SMPs, cut across the learning standards and grade levels to be used K-12. Because social emotional wellness has been less strongly incorporated into teaching, or has been taught completely separately, many teachers may not be as familiar with the themes of social emotional wellness. They have sat off to the side of instruction for some time. In our math equity tool, which is known as Stride 3 in the EdTrust West materials, we wanted to make a tighter and clearer connection among the three components and to put them all in one place where teachers could find and use them together. The National Commission on Social Emotional Academic Development, called SEAD, in 2018 updated the current social emotional wellness themes into 4 new ones, which incorporates a lens of equity to the themes and also address anti-racism challenges. These 4 new themes, which you will see in the following slide, assist us with our purpose in creating this tool.
And I'm going to launch a quick poll, and if you could all respond to this poll, we're curious which statement resonates most with you. I'm seeing some responses come in. We'll leave this open. Oh, sorry. Poll must have gotten relaunched for 1 second. Sorry about that. Hit a wrong button. Thanks for voting. We're seeing a lot of responses come in, and we'll give it another 20 or 30 seconds here. Another last call. 5 more seconds. Okay. I'm going to share out the results. And it's interesting to me that we have pretty even representation across the board. Linda, do you want to talk a little more about this?
Well, I'm delighted to, because those are the purposes that we put out for this tool, and I'm glad to see that the statements resonate with you. All 3 are correct, of course, but to see which one is the one that speaks to you is real interesting for us as developers to see. So thank you, and I hope you will hear in our presentation exactly how these statements fit with the tool that we've developed. There are 4 theme guidebooks. There are 4 theme guidebooks in our set of materials. Agency, belonging, discourse, and identity. Educators want to support students academically and socio-emotionally. Students who have been out of school buildings since March 2020 have experienced losses in their sense of belonging, perhaps their academic identity, and for many, the ability to discuss academics in groups, discourse, and the ability to make choices about their learning interests, agency. These social emotional characteristics are as important as academic content for students to thrive in any instructional setting, particularly one that is unfamiliar. Each guidebook contains additional teacher actions and strategies, specific strategies for English learners, student actions to watch for as evidence, and a glossary of the terms used.
Thank you, Linda, for sharing the SEAD themes and mentioning the mathematical practice standards. Within Stride 3, Stride 3 also provides some guidance in regards to the intersection points between these 2 ideas. This next slide shows a couple screenshots, actually 3, from the guidebook. And this is the lesson planning template. It can be found on pages 13 and 14 of the Stride 3 PDF, which you can download. There will be information at the end of this as to where you can get it. But this is currently a fillable PDF where the text boxes can be populated. There are also radio buttons for a teacher to select the SEAD theme and the math practice standards that they would like to focus on. And there's also a how-to use the lesson planning template, and each how-to step is explained in greater detail. Next, I'd like to hand it to Al again to share a little more about the activities that he did with his students.
I was on mute. Thanks, Dave. So to engage my students, I think about implementing low floor, high ceiling activities to connect with my students' interests while developing their procedural skills and fluency, conceptual understanding, and the application of math to real life. So for this unit, I focused on the SCAD theme of identity. I thought about what the best approach would be, and this would be the best approach to engage my students with the content because of my previous experience teaching application word problems. From those experiences, students would disengage with word problems because they had challenges translating words into an algebraic model. In this example, a jumper, which is the same as a bounce house, it's not a sweater, so a jumper, right? So just keep that in mind when you're reading it, if you can read it, if you can see that. And also think about how a student would approach solving this word problem. Karen, could you please help us by reading that word problem?
Sure, I'd be glad to read it out. A jumper rental company charges a customer an initial charge plus a daily charge to rent. The initial charge is $100 and the daily charge is $25. So the rental company charged Jeff $250. How many days did he rent the jumper?
So what I'd like for you to do now is think about the different ways a student would approach solving this word problem. So probably maybe about a minute or less, think about how they would set it up, what they're thinking about, you know, and maybe the different types of approaches or strategies that a student would use.
And if you're like me, feel free, if you've gotten to a solution, feel free to share it in the chat and a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, Al, I just put into the chat that I think for me, I would draw a picture because I tend to be visual that way. And so that's probably as your student and is how I'd take it.
And I'm seeing Lisa suggested using guess and check. Vanessa's possibly make a list of values. So there's some interesting ideas coming in the chat. Al, I'm going to move us to the next slide if that's all right.
Great, thanks, Lennon. So when reviewing the application word problem example with my students, we discuss and highlight the important information to determine what the question is asking for, how to solve the problem, and writing out the equation in numbers and words. Right? We had a lengthy conversation about jumpers and bounce houses and about if they thought the cost made sense.
Mm.
Like, you know, we can solve these problems and say the answer to this is 6, right? When we work it out mathematically. But does it really make sense to rent a jumper for 6 days? Right. Linda, could you speak to how an educator could use the theme guidebook for our lesson plan template?
Sure. This slide shows the student and teacher actions from the identity guidebook we developed that are related to the SEAD theme of identity and also to the standard of mathematical practice number 4, modeling, which Al chose to use with his students. On the left side, you see student actions that fit in with this kind of question and task. And on the right side, teacher actions that you might do. What we'd like you to do is take a minute, take a look at both sides and type in the chat one student action that you think a student might do in solving Al's problem of the jumper houses, and one teacher action that you might choose to use with the problem of the bouncy house. We'll give you a little bit of time.
Mhm. Yeah, I see that some people are saying they could see the students highlighting the information, using representations. You know, they may ask questions about the world around them. And some people are thinking, I see Elisa saying, you know, thinking about a visual that could be used. And providing a variety of real world contexts.
Thank you everyone for sharing in the chat. We really appreciate it. I'm going to move us to the next slide.
So Al, can you tell us a little bit about how these student-created problems tell you more about the math, the modeling, and the highlight on identity?
Yeah, these student-created examples show me that the students engaged with the content, made the learning their own, and then were able to tap into their own personal interests to create their own word problems. After creating their word problems on the next slide of the assignment, my students had to provide the steps to solve what they created. Being intentional about focusing on my students' identity as doers and learners of mathematics, I was mindful to provide time, space, and opportunities for my students to engage with the content in a way to boost their self-confidence. So you can see that there's 2 examples, and one of my students was, you know, is following what's happening in the NBA, and I won't mention any teams. So, Karen, could you please read the basketball gym example on the right, please?
Be happy to. So a basketball gym charges customers an initial charge plus a daily charge to rent the gym out. The initial charge is $20 and the daily charge is $10. The rental company charged David $160. Create an equation to find out the number of days, X, that David rented the gym.
I really like how the student made it his own or her own, and I'm not shy about basketball teams. Go Lakers!
Warriors, the Dubs. Just saying.
Okay, well, I got to throw in, being from Sacramento, go Kings. It's been a little painful, but I'll throw that in. So, equitableMath.org is a website where you can download this tool along with the other strides. And if you're interested in getting additional information about Stride 3, October 13th is a webinar, and you can register for that when you go to the website. And with that, I'll hand it back to Glennon.
Yes, at this point, we're going to open it up for questions. So if there are any questions you want to share in the chat, we would welcome them.
And I'll just add, Glennon, as people are putting their questions in, that if you are following along on the slide, I have the register button there. There's that yellow arrow. If you just click there, it will take you straight there. So you don't need the link if you are in the slide deck.
And I know one question that comes to mind for me is that the Equitable Math Toolkit was really targeted towards the middle grades, but it seems like a lot of the practices here are applicable across many grade spans. Can one of you speak to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. The grant that was received in order to develop the materials was specifically for middle grades, but we do see a much broader use than just those 3 grades in a grade level. For example, my background is elementary, and so I wanted to make sure that a number of the things we put in would be acceptable for elementary, particularly for English language learners. But it's also true for high school, and Al is a high school teacher, and he's using it.
Al, this question might be directly for you. It's from our friend Albert David. Did you explicitly tell the students to create problems based on their experience to purposefully include their cultural assets?
Yes, thanks for the question, Albert. And yes, I did. I was very purposeful. So actually for the assignment, after we modeled the examples, I was very intentional about them using their own interest when they developed the word problems. So I gave them examples of different themes, like if they were interested in sports, so I could, brought up like the NBA and the NFL. If they were interested in travel or food, and I had them pull pictures, from the internet and then embed them into these slides.
I'm wondering, did you have any students that were just having, sort of like writer's block, like having trouble getting started? I wondered, if they were able to jump right in, or did you have some that were a little more hesitant to come up with something creative like this?
There were, but I created scaffolds. So, being very explicit with the directions, like, okay, let's pick a theme first, they'd pick a theme. Okay, well, about that theme, let's pick a picture,
Mm-hmm.
And this was also built up because you can see that's a two-step equation. We worked it backwards. So they worked with one-step equations, developing their own word problems. And actually, earlier this week, we were working on inequalities. And with those inequalities, we used that same strategy again.
That's great.
Thank you, Al. And thank you, Albert David, for the question. Allison Peters dropped into the chat our feedback survey for today. We are welcoming any additional questions to come via the chat, or if you'd like, you can come off of mute and let us know what questions you have. And we're going to stick around for a few extra minutes, but I'm going to take a moment and share my screen again and close this out. But again, we'll stick around for additional questions past the next couple of minutes.
So we have a question here from Brian, and he's saying, he's wondering, how would you continue working with students when a theme may be introduced that doesn't really connect to any mathematical concept? And Brian, if you'd like to come off mute and elaborate on that, feel free.
Hello. So my question was because, I don't know, a lot of things may come up in the classroom that you maybe like you don't know much about it, and you want to continue working with them on that, like to get their interest and learn from them as well. But then they may just keep quiet after, or they don't know enough about math to like help create a word problem or like make sense of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to take that question?
I can help with that. Thanks for the question, Brian. I really appreciate it. What I did was provide multiple examples. So there's a lot of different ways to enter into the word problem, and then using different types of themes as well, because you never know what interests, what the student interest is, like you're saying. Also, in addition to that, like the pre-building, like the relationship building, that was those slides that were shown earlier, like different ways to build rapport with students that are creating a really low floor for entry. So let me give you an example. Like we saw that bounce house example. There was also examples about like cell phones, cell phone usage, because, more than likely kids have a cell phone or know someone who has a cell phone and used a cell phone. So there's a lot of different entry points to, create access for the students. Did that help? Was that helpful, Brian?
Thank you, Brian, for the question, and thank you, Al, for the response. Again, we're going to stick around for a few extra minutes if there are any questions. I'm just going to close this out real quick, and then we'll be here for additional questions. We have put the feedback survey into the chat. We really love your feedback. It really does guide what topics, how we proceed with Lunch Bites. So please do share your feedback. Again, we hope to see everyone in December at the symposium. We'd really like to thank our sponsor, Chevron, for making this possible. And when we're done, we will share any resources from the chat on this slide as part of our recap email to everyone. And our guests have been amazing, so a quick virtual round of applause to all of our guests. And thank you all for being here. This is the end of our formal programming, but again, we're going to stick around and answer any questions that you may have, and look forward to seeing all of you again sometime soon. Karen, what's bubbling up for you as we, from today's discussion as an important topic to make sure that we cover?
Well, I was, as a former classroom teacher, I was really interested in the lesson plan tool and how that I think can guide me. I think when Brian was asking, well, okay, I have my plan and I'm doing this, but what if I end up, kind of a student question or something takes me off of what I had already preconceived. And it sounds like that toolkit for lesson planning can really help me think ahead of time about some different entryways, pathways, or on-ramps that students can have to get to where I need them to go. And somebody did ask in the chat, I'm not sure if they're still on, but they were saying, how did they find those guidebooks, the ones on agency and discourse and belonging that Linda had talked about? And so I had put into the chat that equitablemath.org is where they would go to download all the resources that are there in the guidebooks or some of the resources that are available.
And we've also linked them in the slides, and we'll include the slides as part of our recap email to everyone that's here today. If there aren't any additional questions, we really appreciate everyone being here today. And thank you, and thanks for all the gratitude. We've really enjoyed being with you today, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. See you next time.